contributions.
I beg to move that this House do now adjourn, Madam Deputy.
The question is, this House do now adjourn. If I let the front benches make their way out so we can prepare for the adjournment debate. Adjournment debate, John Pearce.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, for allowing this important adjournment debate. Today is the anniversary of Hamas's terrorist attack on Israel. It was a pogrom in which at least 1,195 Israelis, 79 foreign nationals from some 30 countries were murdered. Over 4,800 people were injured, and more than 250 men, women and children were taken hostage. It was the worst terrorist attack in Israel's history, and it was the bloodiest day in the history of the Jewish people since the Holocaust.
Will the honourable member give way?
I thank the member for giving way, and so early in his speech. I think it's worth pausing to reflect on the fact that the reason the atrocity was so bad and so many people lost their lives at the hands of Hamas is because Hamas intended for that to be the case. Of course, in the year that has followed, so many innocent people have lost their lives, have suffered and have been displaced. But will the honourable member join with me in condemning Hamas and its evil actions that took place on October the 7th?
I absolutely welcome the honourable member's intervention and completely agree that Hamas is a terrorist organisation that set out that day to murder as many innocent civilians as it possibly could. Talk of statistics risks robbing the victims of their incredible humanity and precious individuality. And I want to touch on some of the incredible stories from that day. I will give way.
Madam, can I commend the Honourable Gentleman for High Peak for bringing this forward? I spoke to him beforehand. I just want to bring to his attention, to the House's attention, a lady that I met when I was in Israel back in the week after Easter, Amanda Dalmari. She was a lady that spoke yesterday about her daughter Emily, who was kidnapped, and she's lived every day of that loss and that kidnap all those times. Does he agree with me that we salute the bravery, the courage and the determination of those families to have their friends and their hostages and their family members home to enjoy life once again?
I thank the honourable member for his intervention, and I absolutely agree with you that the incredible courage of the families of the hostages is remarkable. So many in this House will have spoken to those families, and their strength and their resolve is extraordinary and empowers all the rest of us. I will give away.
I thank him for being so generous with his time in this really important adjournment debate. But I too had the opportunity to meet with Mandy Damari, and she wanted our government to acknowledge that her daughter Emily is a British citizen and requires the support of her government to do everything that they can to allow for her release as a hostage.
I very much thank the honourable member for her intervention. I too have spoken to Mandy, and she was very clear that her daughter is a British citizen, and there are 4 other connected individuals who are held hostage, who are connected to Britain, and they also need to come home as soon as possible. I just want to touch on some of the other groups from that day. The group of pensioners on a day trip in the Dead Sea that were gunned down in Sderot after their minivan developed a flat tyre. The young partygoers massacred at the Supernova Music Festival, some of whom, like many women elsewhere that day, were subjected to unspeakable violence perpetrated with shocking brutality, according to the UN Special Representative on Sexual Violence and Conflict. And the 12-year-old British-Israeli twins, Yanni and Liel, who were murdered alongside their great aunt and their grandfather at kibbutz BRE. So little of Liel's body was recovered that some of her toys were buried instead. Liel and Yanni were 2 of the 15 Britons murdered on the 7th of October.
Remember, give way. I'll never forget the smell of smoke that hung in the air when I visited that kibbutz in March this year. That will stay with me forever. And equally, standing at the site of the Nova Festival, the feeling of isolation and the silence that was only broken by families mourning. I hope the honourable member will agree with me that whilst today we've heard calls for ceasefires and calls for aid, what is most important here today is that we continue to call for those hostages to be returned back to their families.
I thank the honourable member for his intervention, and yes, the clarion call from this Parliament is bring them home. Hamas was indiscriminate in its killing and was indiscriminate in those that it dragged back to its terror tunnels in Gaza. They ranged from 9-year-old Kafir Bibas and 4-year-old brother Ariel and 85-year-old Shlomo Mansour. Shlomo survived the 1941 Fahud pogrom in Iraq and emigrated to Israel at the age of 13. On the 7th of October, Shlomo was kidnapped from his home at the small, quiet kibbutz of Kisufim. Last month, I met with Shlomo's granddaughter, Noam. I also met with Eviatar, David's mother, Galia, and brother Eli. On the 7th of October, 23-year-old Eviatar was seized at the Supernova Festival. His family and friends hold weekly dance and jam sessions in Tel Aviv's Hostages Square to raise awareness of his continuing plight. I also met with Sharon Lifshitz, the daughter of 85-year-old Yocheved and 84-year-old Oded. On the 7th of October, the couple were taken from their home in Kibbutz near Oz. Yocheved was freed after 2 weeks, but Oded remains in captivity. Oded has spent his life campaigning for peace and Palestinian rights.
Will my honourable friend give way? I thank my honourable friend for giving way and for securing this very important debate on this profoundly sad occasion. And I wish to draw attention to a thread that has gone through everything that you said, which is the nature of the communities on the Gaza border that were attacked. One of the tragic ironies is that this was an attack on communities that were almost all kibbutzim or moshavim. These are idealistic communities founded on a cooperative ethos, the residents of whom practice what they preached about coexistence and peace. I visited these communities in peacetime. They're bucolic, they're idealistic. The people there spoke about sending money across the border to people that they knew in Gaza through third countries in order to support them. They organised transport to hospitals for people from Gaza. These were people who were straining every sinew that they could to bring about peace, who believed in a two-state solution, and the horrors that were visited on them on that day are something that I cannot stop thinking about, and I thank my honourable friend for giving us the opportunity to honour the memory of the people who suffered on that day.
I thank the honourable member for his intervention and could not agree more with his experience of the kibbutz. I too visited kibbutz Kfar Aza in July 2023, which was founded by the Mizrahi refugees from Morocco and Egypt in 1951. The kibbutz is so close to Gaza, it's possible to hear the mosque's call to prayer. Over lunch with the kibbutzniks, they told us of the ever-present danger of the rocket attacks and the terror tunnels which Hamas had attempted to dig nearby. But they also spoke of their compassion for ordinary people of Gaza, just a couple of miles away. I will give way.
I'm very, very grateful. I also visited Kfar Aza just a few weeks before the horrific attacks on October the 7th by Hamas, and the visit left a profoundly deep impact on me, especially in light of what followed just a few short weeks later. And listening to Emily Damari's mum, Mandy, at the memorial in Hyde Park yesterday, pleading with us all who were present to do something to help her daughter. Well, as a mum to an Emily, who was exactly the same age as her Emily will be now, I'm here tonight to ask if he will join me in pleading with the Minister and our government to work night and day to ensure that Emily and the other 100 hostages still being held in unimaginable horror in Gaza are released as soon as humanly possible.
I thank the Honourable Member for her intervention and absolutely join with her call for the hostages to be returned at the soonest possible opportunity. The kibbutzniks that we spoke to used to stage an annual festival in which they would gather to fly kites adorned with the words peace, shalom, salam at the nearby border. Last year, the annual kite festival was set for Saturday, the 7th of October. As always, the Kutz family, whose brainchild the festival was, had prepared the kites. But there was no kites or messages of hope or peace that dark day. Instead, Aviv Kutz, his wife Livnat, and his children Rotem and Yonatan and Yivtat were murdered in their home by Hamas terrorists. They were found in a bed with Aviv's arms around his wife and children. Their unflown kites were found nearby. The family were among more than 60 kibbutz residents who were massacred that day. This has been a horrifying and harrowing year of suffering. As many have said, we must do all we can to bring the fighting to an end as quickly as possible, with the hostages home from Gaza, aid into Gaza, and a pathway to a long-term and sustainable peace. The impact of that terrible day has also been felt 2,000 miles away in what the Prime Minister has rightly described the rise of vile hatred in our own communities. Anti-Semitic incidents have reached their highest total. Nearly 7 in 10 British Jews report that they are less likely to show visible signs of Judaism. Nearly half say that they've considered leaving the UK because of anti-Semitism. Jewish children are unable to wear their uniforms on the way to school. Jewish students intimidated on campuses. Jewish places of worship defaced and graffitied. This is intolerable in modern Britain. I know that a number of frontbenchers would have wished to speak in today's debate, including the members from Bury South and Finchley and Golders Green, who have been steadfast in their support throughout the last year. I'm sure the whole House will join me in saying we stand with and by our Jewish fellow citizens in the face of this hatred. The 7th of October atrocities showed humanity at its worst, exposing once again what Holocaust survivor Sam Coltman termed the thin, fragile veneer of civilization. But as the late Martin Gilbert argued, even in the darkest days, there are sparks of light.
Thank you. I thank my honourable friend for securing this important debate on the anniversary of the attacks and for delivering such an eloquent speech. As we mark a year since the appalling attacks, I proudly add my voice to Bury's Faith Forum and Bury's own Council of Mosques in emphasising our shared bonds of faith and humanity and calling for a sincere, lasting resolution for Israel and Palestine that begins with the safe return of hostages and an immediate ceasefire. Does my honourable friend agree that even in these darkest of times, the smallest shard of light shines brightest, and that light is the release of these hostages and a ceasefire and a sustainable, peaceful, secure Israel and a sustainable, peaceful Palestinian state?
I very much welcome the honourable member's intervention. I completely agree with him that within the despair that we have seen over the last year, there has to be light at the end of that tunnel, and the work done in his constituency to bring communities together and communities across the country will be a vital part of that. I want to end by talking about Emily, who a number of members have raised. I think we've all been touched by the campaign that her mother Mandy has run in her name and continues to do so. She says that Emily has never lost touch with her British roots, that Emily loves Spurs and Robbie Williams and Cadbury's chocolate buttons, and she makes a fine cup of tea. Emily's family haven't seen her for 366 days. She was violently kidnapped from Kibbutz Kfar Aza. Her beloved puppy was shot and killed in her arms as Emily was dragged from our home in her pyjamas. Hamas has refused the Red Cross access to Emily and the other hostages. But news of Emily came during last November's hostage release. In the tunnels, those who were released said that Emily had been singing a song to the young girls every morning called Boker Shel Kef. It's a great morning. Emily hasn't given up hope. Her family has not given up hope. And we must not give up hope. We must bring home the British hostages, Emily, Eli, Oded, Avinatan, Tishak, and all of the hostages. Yeah. We hold all of the hostages in our hearts, and all those whose lives were lost on the 7th of October and those who mourn them. And all those innocent Israelis and Palestinians who have enjoyed pain, sorrow and grief over the last year. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Yeah. Foreign Office Minister Stephen Doughty.
Well, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I am hugely grateful to my honourable friend, the member for High Peak, for securing this timely debate, and indeed to all of those honourable members who have intervened and are attending this debate tonight. And I want to pay particular recognition to his work as the recently appointed Chair of Labour Friends of Israel. And the Minister for the Middle East would, of course, have been due to respond to this debate, but he is currently participating in commemorative events related to the subject of this very debate. And it's therefore my privilege to respond on behalf of the government. And can I thank in particular my honourable friend for his candid, at times shocking but powerful remarks regarding all of those and the human stories that are at the heart of those terrible events of the 7th of October, and with him pay tribute to the courage and resilience of the families, in particular of all of those who've lost their lives and all those who are still held hostage. Because a year on since the worst terror attack in Israel's history, we remember all of those killed at the hands of Hamas in that barbaric attack, their families, their loved ones, and condemn those responsible. Because without doubt, Madam Deputy Speaker, that was the bloodiest day in Jewish history since the Holocaust, a day we should never have seen, a day we would rather have never needed to mark. And distressingly, for some families, their nightmare persists as their loved ones continue to be held by Hamas. Let me be clear, this is utterly unacceptable. They must be released immediately. And as the Prime Minister referenced in his statement earlier today, and has been referenced by many of the honourable members this evening, one of those hostages who still remains in Gaza is Emily Damari. She is, as we've heard, a British citizen who was brutally attacked and kidnapped on the morning of October the 7th. And a year later, as we have heard, she is still held by Hamas, surrounded by the death and darkness of the tunnels that continues to haunt her loved ones. And Emily's story, as we've heard among many stories this evening, is just one of the painful reminders of the suffering many families continue to endure at the hands of Hamas. British linked, and many, many more. Their pain is our pain. We continue to demand the immediate and unconditional release of Emily and all the other hostages. And the Honourable Gentleman gave many, many other examples. And their chilling examples are proof of Hamas's cruelty. And our thoughts today are with all of those who lost loved ones on the 7th of October and those still cruelly held by Hamas. He is absolutely right as well to have brought the House's attention to, and we've all seen it in our own communities, that since the attack last year, we have witnessed a deeply worrying rise in anti-Semitism and hatred across the world, including in this country. There is no place for this hatred in our communities and society. Let's be clear, Hamas did not want to just attack Israel, it wanted to send a signal to Jews everywhere. It wanted them to feel scared and unsafe, regardless of where in the world they happen to be. And the global rise in anti-Semitism following the attack highlights the need for urgent collective action to eliminate this abhorrent ideology for good. And that is why this government is resolutely committed to working with the Jewish community to address the challenges it faces in the UK and indeed across the world. And I have heard from Jewish communities in my own city of Cardiff the fears that they have and of their lived experiences of anti-Semitism and hate. And I have met with organisations like the Board of Deputies and CST and many others, and I pay tribute to their work. And today, the Foreign Secretary and the Minister for the Middle East met with members of the Jewish community to outline the government's support for them and to remember and honour the victims of October the 7th. And I'm also proud that this year the UK holds the presidency of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. This allows us to demonstrate our global leadership in combating anti-Semitism and promoting Holocaust remembrance, research and education. We have also tragically seen since that dreadful day intolerable death and destruction in Gaza since then. Over 41,000 people have now died. Over half of all identified bodies are women and children. And no matter how difficult the circumstances, we reiterate that all parties must act in accordance with international law. But the fact that this conflict is continuing and intensifying by the day is a matter of deep concern to all sides of this House. And that should compel us to redouble our efforts towards achieving an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and to pursue the path of politics and diplomacy, because that is the best way to get the hostages out and to stop the devastation for all. And we are particularly concerned about restrictions on humanitarian aid with winter approaching, restrictions that must be lifted so that the United Nations and humanitarian agencies can do their jobs safely in accordance with their UN mandate. Turning to the wider region, the latest escalation involving Lebanese Hezbollah and the Iranian attack on Israel is yet another blow to regional stability, and we are deeply concerned to see the significant civilian casualties. The UK was the first G7 country to call for an immediate ceasefire between Lebanese Hezbollah and Israel on the 19th of September, and the Prime Minister has also been clear that we stand with Israel and recognise its right to self-defence in the face of Iranian aggression. It is Iran's malign role in the region that is pushing the region further towards escalation, and we call on Iran to step back from the brink, because we must avoid this conflict spiralling out of control into a wider regional war. Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to turn now to how the UK is responding specifically and including to many of the points raised by honourable members this evening. Firstly, I want to reassure all honourable members that we are continuing to work with partners across the region to secure the release of all remaining hostages, including British nationals and those with a close connection to the United Kingdom. This has been a priority since day one of this government. The Foreign Secretary has visited Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories twice, and the Prime Minister has spoken, of course, to Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Abbas. They have also met the families of those currently being held by Hamas, and the Prime Minister hosted a commemoration event last week to honour their resilience and an undefeated spirit during these challenging times. The UK will remain a vital security partner to Israel as it faces threats from Iran and its malign partners in the region who are pursuing its annihilation. And we will also play our full diplomatic role in ending this conflict and creating a safe and secure Israel alongside a viable and sovereign Palestinian state. An immediate ceasefire is an absolutely necessary first step towards that goal. Responding to the wider humanitarian crisis, we trebled our aid commitment to the occupied Palestinian territories in the last financial year. We will continue to maintain significant funding to trusted aid agencies on the ground. We lifted the UK's funding pause on UNRWA and released £21 million to support its humanitarian appeal in Gaza and basic services following robust action taken to ensure its neutrality. We need calm heads and an urgent focus on a negotiated political solution, Madam Deputy Speaker, to end this cycle of violence so that Israeli, Palestinian and Lebanese civilians can return to their homes and live in peace and security. And together with our allies, the United Kingdom remains determined to steer the region towards a path of peace and reconciliation with a two-state solution at the heart of our approach. Madam Deputy Speaker, in conclusion, a year on from Hamas's horrific attack on October the 7th, the United Kingdom remains firmly committed to Israel's defence and security. Those killed, injured and taken on the 7th of October and since, and their families, will be in all of our minds today, especially. This escalating regional conflict is in no one's interest. That is why we're calling for an immediate ceasefire. But finally, I want to reiterate that we will continue to use every diplomatic lever to bring that about and secure the release of hostages in coordination with our partners. We all want to see them brought home.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. As many of that opinion say aye? Aye. The ayes have it. Order, order.